website, milwaukieoregon.gov/meetings. Scroll on down to November 1st and you'll see the work session there. I do have those reports with me if you want to ask questions about them. I'm just going to highlight a few of the things. And what I thought was important to start with was some of the things that we've been learning through our focus groups. So council, as you know, we've set out from the very beginning to try and make equity part of our focus on this project. You have summaries from a few of the conversations that we've been having with people. We've had several more interviews, and I pulled out a few of the important points from them. The one that I want to start off with is that, and this, it's important to note, applies to parks in general. A lot of the conversations that we had with people were not specific to any one individual parks, but were more broad policy sort of questions. But one thing that was really revealing is that people with disabilities and people in our BIPOC community don't always feel safe or welcome in our parks. There are a lot of different reasons for that. Many of the things that came up about that conversations or around those conversations, and this was whether or not people had disabilities or not, or however they identified. Some of the things that made them feel unsafe or unwelcome are the same sort of things that might make me feel unsafe or unwelcome. And this was not about any specific one park, so I can't tell you like, hey, we're gonna go solve this problem, but parks that are unclean, parks that have vandalism, and sometimes there's drug use or paraphernalia that's left behind. Those are sorts of things that might make me feel unwelcome. But I think that there was a sense that if you are the member of an outside community, it might not be the best way to phrase that, but if you are someone who has a disability and might have some anxiety about being judged or know that you are going to be judged. If you are the member of our BIPOC community and you are concerned about the way people might treat you, or you are from outside the neighborhood, I think that adds to the level of sense of parks are unwelcoming. What we heard a lot from people about ways to solve this from a design perspective was, hey, put up a sign. That could be a sign that says, hey, you are welcome in multiple languages. Perhaps that we include, and this is me kind of adding on to that. No one mentioned this specifically, but perhaps there are more murals. Perhaps there are more multicultural events. Perhaps there are different things that we do. Maybe we continue to have Juneteenth at different parks throughout the city. Maybe we look to have our own sort of fiesta in the park, similar to what NCPRD had. But there is a sense that, and one of the comments is that sometimes our neighborhood parks feel like an extension of other people's backyards. And to me, I think that is one of the things where I don't know how much we can do from a design standpoint, perhaps fences, perhaps more trees. Larger parks would certainly help, although if you've got some more land for me to build parks on, that's great, but we know that there isn't a lot out there. So I think really the sense that we need to do is we need to work to continue this kind of marathon work that we're working on right now, which is to ensure that our neighborhoods feel inclusive, that our city feels inclusive. And then that's not to say that we don't deal with the vandalism, we don't deal with these other things that are going on out there. But if we make our neighborhoods more inclusive and more welcoming, I think other people will. Signs, maybe that doesn't do a whole lot to change some people's attitudes, but the people who are telling us, hey, a sign in a park would make me feel a lot more welcome, I think they would certainly appreciate it. Some of the things that you might be hearing or might read in these reports aren't necessarily surprising, but I think that's really important to know. ADA and barrier-free codes are the bare minimum. There are a lot of things out there that we need to go beyond that. We need to strive to be more universally inclusive. So for example, a 5-foot path or sidewalk might be the ADA code, but doesn't necessarily leave enough room for someone in a walker, someone with braces, someone in a wheelchair to have a friend, a caretaker, perhaps somebody else with a mobility device walk alongside with them. So it certainly doesn't allow two people in wheelchairs to necessarily pass each other. And those are the sorts of things that came up with that. offering parks for all people, regardless of ability of age. That one of the things we heard a lot from our BIPOC focus groups was, I want to go to the park with my entire family. I have kids who are different ages. I want to have something to do myself. That sort of belonging is really important. It might be some of the things that we can glean from that first bullet point on this page. Well-designed restrooms and drinking fountains are really important. We heard a lot about bathrooms in these BIPOC focus groups, particularly in the one in Spanish. And it's not enough to make sure that, again, as I mentioned before, meeting that ADA code, right? It's, can the wheelchair get in there and turn around? Can the caretaker or a family member go in with it, or a child go in with them? Is there a bench, right, to put their belongings? Maybe they need to change their clothes in order to use the bathroom. Is there a hook to put that on there? Does a drinking fountain have a handle that works well for people who can't get up and lean over the drinking fountain? These sorts of things. Some of the stuff, you know, I felt like I knew. I've been working as a planner since 2011, designing parks, working on parks. Some of these things, you know, I kind of just hit myself in the head on and said, yeah, geez, I knew this was important. But when you hear somebody else tell you that, it really, really drives it home. Distributing amenities and investing in parks throughout the cities. We heard a lot about the East Side. Now, we did have a group of people from a diverse area of the city. In some cases, we heard about things like Harmony Park, which are outside the city. We heard some parks mentioned that might not have had the right name. The community members don't always know the right name of things. But I do know that, like, looking at our project is focused toward the west side of the city. That's unintentional, but sometimes these unintentional investments add up. And I think that if we want to respond to these sort of comments well, we should do an analysis looking at the distribution of our amenities, looking at the distribution of our parklands, making sure that they are geographically spread out, and look at the people who live around there. Perhaps we can perform some sort of analysis and maybe put together some sort of a statement on how we would invest in the future to look at these sorts of things when opportunities come up. The final thing I want to mention on this slide, and this one is extremely important too, I wanted to kind of book in these comments. We heard a lot about dogs, particularly dogs off leashes, adding to the sense of feeling unwelcome in parks. This came up a great deal at our BIPOC focus group. That focus group was supposed to be about 45 minutes of conversation. It went almost 2 hours. And this topic in particular was there quite a bit. It was not just in the BIPOC focus group, it was in all the conversations we heard. In fact, we saw it a lot in the comments in the surveys that we received in this October round of discussion. But I think that the feedback that we've been getting from the community is that we really need to think about how people use our parks and making sure that we at least have some signage on the code that requires dogs to be on leashes. Just as an admissible employee, I can tell you that I spent a lot of time in parks and natural areas throughout the years, not specifically here to Milwaukie. I'm out doing my job, I'm checking up on something. Hey, did they cut down the right branch or whatever? Did they cut the grass right? And somebody's 30 yards away from me waving at me, hey, it's okay, they're friendly, you know? And I'm just out doing my job. And I think that there are a lot of people out there who feel the same way, that I'm just trying to enjoy the park. It's not an issue if it's a dog friendly. Perhaps they're walking a dog that's on a leash that might not respond well to a dog who's off a leash. Maybe they are a member of a community who's had a bad experience. Maybe they just want to mind their own business. I don't know. I'm not trying to read in too much to why people are putting this in there, but I know it's in there. I will also say one of the reasons why I want to put a lot of emphasis on this bullet point is when we were out doing our open houses in these 3 parks, we heard from people, oh, you think XYZ park is too small for an off-the-leash dog area? Well, that's okay. I'm going to continue to bring my dog without a leash anyway. So to the people who feel that way in our community, I really want you to know that there are members of your community who feel unwelcome in the parks because you're choosing to ignore those codes. We have these codes here for a reason, and that is because there are a lot of people out there who have negative experiences around dogs, particularly those who are off a leash.
Can I pick up on that?
Absolutely.
I mean, at one point, many years ago, I couldn't even say how many, there was an effort to go back around and put up more signage about leashes required. It is a topic that comes up on Nextdoor quite a bit. People complaining that we don't have enough off-leash dog parks, and people who feel unsafe because dogs are off leash and it's not just in the park, it's walking to the park on the street and everything else. I will say an elderly neighbor of mine was knocked down in the park by the sewage treatment plant by a dog that was a friendly dog. It wasn't like attacking her. Right. It was just jumping up, and she was a frail small person who got knocked over and ended up in the ER. I think, there's a lot of stuff there, and we can have signage, and we do, I think, generally have signage, but until we have some enforcement or at least some active public information kind of campaign about that, that's going to be a recurring issue and has been for years.
Yeah, I mean, this is not, again, as I started off the conversation, this is not necessarily unique to Milwaukee. This is an experience that has happened everywhere. I have heard it in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in Michigan, where I've worked before. I do want to make sure that I'm clear to noting that we did hear a lot about the need for off-the-leash dog areas. We do need more of those as well. But Bowman Bray, Belfour, and Scott Parks are less than an acre wide, and they are really not big enough for that. And I think that in our smaller neighborhood parks in particular, we might want to look at ways that we can make people feel more welcome when it comes to being around dogs.
Adam, can I had a couple things. First of all, thank you. I thought this was really, really valuable information, and I'm really glad that these focus groups had such thoughtful participation from the folks who engaged. This is really, I know it's a small sample, but like you said, this is information you don't get if that's not the experience you have. It can feel like a duh, but it's so valuable to have that input from those folks. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to the people who participated. It is distressing that people don't feel welcome in our parks, and it's valuable to know that something as simple as signage could help with that. I will note that I personally have been part of conversations with NCPRD around signage improvements, and they have their own sign code. And they are very reluctant to do anything on their signage that is departing from that. Their definition of welcome seems to be to have the signs be very small. I don't know how many times I have talked to people in parks around town when I have been in them and said, this is not an off-leash area. And they've said, what? Or I've said, bikes are not allowed in this park. And they say, I didn't see any signs. And I take them back, and truly the icons are like this big. So of course they didn't see the signs. Sometimes I think it is an excuse, but I also think we have a legitimate problem with messaging to the public with the existing sign that we have through NCPRD. It isn't something that I think we can do a whole lot about so long as we have our parks managed by NCPRD instead of the city.
Yeah, I think that, again, what people were telling us when we asked, what can we do specifically to design signage was one of those things that came up. I know that, for example, we did the mural on the bike trail recently. We put in the progressive flat. I don't know that we needed NCPRD's permission to do that. I don't want to dive into sort of those sorts of things here, but I think that continuing to have these conversations, this was a small sample size. I think that there were things, and I have been thinking about ways that we can talk about this after we get these plans approved about what we could do better to get more participation in these focus groups, and one of it comes to a lot of relationship building. But I think that having these conversations out here in city council meetings together, and hearing people say, I don't feel comfortable there, and we say, what can we do? And they say, put in a sign. I think listening to them, even though it might be an excuse, people might not see it. People generally might not see it at all. There might not be a whole lot that we can do, but we've asked them for what's one thing that we can do, and they told us, so maybe we should do that one thing. Looking at the general engagement, just jumping into this, I'm going to try and move just a little bit quickly, but as you know, we had a very busy October, wrapping up to the end of our planning phase. So we had 3 hybrid meetings with online surveys. Overall, 61 people and 146 surveys combined during October 6th through the 19th. That participation is down quite a bit. Part of me likes to think that people are seeing these designs and they're like, oh, wow, they're wonderful. I don't need to fill out a survey. But I think also it's a recognition that there's a heck of a lot going on in the world right now. People are very busy in October. There's something happening next week that's got a lot of people's attention right now. I know that I've been receiving a whole lot of postcards about that election, and perhaps some of ours got mixed up in there. To those people who are unhappy about the number of postcards, I hear you, but we do know that when we ask people, particularly at our open houses, what is the best way to let you know to get here? How did you find out about this event in your neighborhood park? They told us you sent me a postcard. But participation is down. The good news is that we're still right around that 8% of participation for people who identify as being in the BIPOC community or being multiracial, down to about 14% in this round in overall in October, people who are new participants. That could be that it's because we were doing planning meetings, and people are very busy. Who wants to go to a meeting? An open house with a face painter and some barbecue in your neighborhood is a lot more fun to attend. And so maybe we aren't getting as many new people because of that. Also, it's maybe that those new people that came to those open houses in the spring and the summer are still involved, and therefore they feel like they can't check that box that says new. I don't know the answers to that, but this is the information that I have. Overall, there are about 140 people that we talked to during that 2-week or so period in October. Those were people like when we had the desk set up in the library of the lobby, people saying, oh, hey, I can't stay and talk to you, but thanks for the information. I'll go home and fill out a survey. How many of those people actually fill out a survey, I don't know. But then also 182 people did visit the 3 pages on Engage Milwaukie. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of multiple counting going on here. I know that there are people who have been to all 7 of the events that we've done for all 3 parks, because they really care a lot of that. I'm sure that there are people who are filling out a survey in person, and then they're going home online and they're filling out another person. To me as a planner, this is not an election, this is about preference, but if you feel so strongly about your neighborhood park that you're gonna fill out a survey twice after you've already been to a 2-hour meeting about it, then okay, we're gonna listen to you. I don't know how much of that we can look into, dive into. It would take a lot of time to go through all these surveys. There are some things that we can do, maybe if things slow down a little bit here, to figure out how many people actually participated. But we're getting pretty close to 300 email addresses on our list. And then there's a whole bunch of people on Engage Milwaukie. So we could start to look at those lists and see where there's doubles. I don't think we're ever gonna know exactly how many people participated, but there's quite a few. And I think that we're pretty pleased with the engagement overall. Diving into some specific parks here. So shout out to the folks who live around Bowman Bray and are talking to us about Bowman Bray Park. 41 people came to the planning meeting. That was the same number that came to the other 2 that we had in October. We're also seeing a lot of surveys on the other parks from people who say that they live in the Lake Road neighborhood. 63 online surveys or in-person surveys. 60% of the people said that the park design that we showed them meets their needs. Of those 40%, a great deal said they were unsure. most of the comments that we saw on surveys that said that the park did not fit their need was because they felt the park was inaccessible. And we can talk about why I think that is in a second. 19% of those people said that they were new to Milwaukie planning, and right around city demographics in terms of BIPOC community participation around Bowman Bray. So what did
That guy wearing a Spidey hat.
you know, he didn't put that on his survey, I don't know, but he was the first person in the ball pit. And I can tell you, if we can find a way to build a ball pit in our parks, maybe it's only a temporary one. This was the most popular feature at all of the open houses that we did. He was the first one in there at Bowman Bray, so.
It was me. I paid him.
So what did these people tell us? What is the feedback that we got, and what are some challenges that we had at Bowman Bray Park? Ensure that the park and that the pathway are accessible to all mobility, to people with mobility devices, people with wheels. When one of the changes that we proposed to people from the 2015 plan at our planning meeting was that maybe we only make some of the new amenities accessible by cement, and that the full perimeter path, and I'll show you the design in a second here, it'll make a lot more sense, but maybe we change some of that perimeter pathway to being gravel. And so a lot of people said, hey, that park doesn't meet my needs, said it, and they specifically called out that change that we made. Providing more shade and more benches was something that was very important. I will say that budget is a big concern at Bowman Bray Park. It has a pretty small construction budget for what we're trying to do. The budget that we have was estimated based on a 2015 plan. As you know, things have gone up quite a bit in the last year since we estimated this, and probably since this grant budget was written. We are adding to that. So we are adding a pollinator garden. We are adding this pull-off area. We are adding and sprucing up the playground design, and we'll take a look at that. But people did say, hey, this park kind of lacks a wow factor. One of the surveys that stands out in my mind is, and I'm paraphrasing here, said something to the effect of, hey, this is a very nice, simple park design. But this is also just a very nice, simple park design. So taking a look at the design, this is the one that we showed in October. This will change. For those of you who are watching who hadn't heard the news, we have begun steps to acquire the Where Else Lane property so that we will have this connection between the neighborhood. We heard a lot about that in October, even though we were at a meeting saying, hey, it's now on the agenda to discuss this at council tomorrow night. People still wanted to let us know how important that was. You know, for many ways, I see this not only as a neighborhood park, but as a bit of an oasis for people who are going back and forth. And so when you see here, one of the things that we did in our surveys is we told people, hey, what's going to be in the park? And then here are some other things that we want some feedback on. So we asked people to rank these different amenities, 1 to 6, and then we average out the scores. So picnic shelter was most important, followed by a swing set, pollinator garden, a play log, a drinking fountain, a pull-off area, and a drop-off area.
Wait. Most important?
Most important. Lower the score, the more important. 1 is the highest, 7 is the less.
Okay.
Or 6 is the least. So now, one of the things to keep in mind about this is about preference. And so if you had to rank your preference over a swing set and a place to park, it might be kind of a no-brainer what people are going to pick. It might also be that just because something isn't preferred doesn't mean that it's not very important. So remember, we talked about people stressing the importance of accessibility in this park. One of the things that we heard about when we talked about when we were talking about the Bowman Bray acquisition piece is that this neighborhood lacks a lot of sidewalks, that street condition is a concern, and half of those streets and blocks that don't have sidewalks are outside of the city. There isn't something that we could do about those. And so one of the members of the focus group for people with disabilities lives in this neighborhood, lives near this park. And she and several other people that we talked to about this park said, I cannot get to this park unless there is a place for me to park because there are no sidewalks and the road conditions are too poor. And so, again, a drinking fountain. We've talked about how this is part of a multi-use trail that gives people, pedestrians, bicyclists, a way to connect to the neighborhood without going up to Lake Road. That to me says that like a drinking fountain in an area where there aren't a lot of shops, there aren't a lot of public buildings, might be a little bit more important. So this is not an election. This is about preference. And we do need to kind of take a look at some of these things and understand that just because it's not popular doesn't mean it's not important. But we are going to have to make some decisions here at Bowman Bray Park. One of the things that we are going to look at is this multi-use trail will need to shrink. So it'll probably need to get more narrow. It will probably need to come out.
Is that a cost thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the reasons why, and this is the trail that I mentioned here, going along this back fence line, you can see it's brown as opposed to this gray. That's where we changed it to gravel. That was to save a little bit of money. That's also, right, concrete is about 8% of global carbon production. So one of the things that we talked about in Public Works was, hey, how can we help implement some of those climate action plan goals, and switching to something other than concrete was one of those ways that we try to do that. We heard way too much from people to do this. So another thing is safety. So we show this path coming out at the intersection of Bowman and Bray Street. It's hard to say because I tried to zoom in on this design as much as possible. But if we can have people come out here to Bowman Street, right where it turns into a public drive, we will use less concrete and it will probably be a little bit more safer. Bicyclists will be coming out on Bowman Street where maybe more vehicles expect to see a bicycle coming out as opposed to kind of at this curve of the street here. But most of it has to do with cost. I do believe that there are going to be some other things that we need to look at with cost here. We are trying really, really hard to make all these things happen. We did a lot of cost estimating before we brought these things out here. We do have a high contingency. We are factoring in inflation, but Bowman Bray is going to be a little bit of a challenge here. Moving on. So I'm just going to pause here with Bowman Bray, if there are any questions on Bowman Bray.
Well, something that struck me about this design initially, and then turned out all three designs, and looking then at the comments, visuals, I start with the design. It was brought up in all three parks was that everybody wanted more trees, more shade, and particularly on the playgrounds.
Yes.
And that was what struck me when I looked at the design. I was like, how come we're not shading playground from the south, right? Because we've just experienced ridiculously hot summer. That's going to be the norm going forward. As a former parent of little kids, I wouldn't bring them out to play in a playground in the middle of the summer without a shaded space for them to play in. So that, I think those comments were pretty critical.
They were extremely important. And that was one thing that we heard a lot. I didn't put this on the screen, but add some more trees. The trees that you do have in the park, move them around. Think about where they're going to be shading people. We did get some comments that, hey, maybe make sure you're only shading the park, but yes, shade the playground. One of the things that we did add, and so this is what we showed people in October since we've received, and we have received all these comments since then. But at the open house, which was also on a very hot day, we had to move it to avoid an even hotter day. We did add in to the 2015 plan some trees here next to the playground. That is actually the south side of the park. This diagram is kind of off. The top of the page here is actually the west. You can't see the key here because I've cut it off the page. Were there any other questions or comments on Bowman Street? But even since we added those 2 trees by the playground, we still heard, no, you still need some more. Good job. Do some more. Speaking about a place where we heard a lot about trees, Belfort Park. So 21 people attended the planning meeting. We received 59 surveys in person or online. 73% of the people felt the park met their needs. One of the comments that we heard quite a bit was like, hey, this park has something for everybody. That is actually one of the challenges that we will talk about in a second here. 14% of the people said that they were new to Milwaukie planning. 94% identify as white. Again, we asked people to rank their preference on some items. These are the things that we want feedback on. We gave them a whole long list of things that were going to be included in the park. One of them was native plants. On all three parks, we heard native plants, community, and trees. And we heard it multiple times for each park. But people do appreciate that this park has something for everybody. We did get mixed reviews on a water feature and a community garden. So one of the things that we added in here, and we'll see this in a second, is going back to the neighborhood plan. The community had put together a plan before NCPRD. They had a water table in that design. And we heard a lot at the open house, probably because it was a very hot summer, but also because we don't have one in the city yet, is build a splash pad. Belfour Park is not a very good spot for a splash pad. It is a very small park. Splash pads are very expensive. They are very large. They bring a lot of people to the park. Belfour Park probably doesn't need to be a destination park with destination type amenities. But we feel like we can fit into the budget a nice simple water table. But we did get some feedback on that. And this did, and I was surprised by this, was ranked the lowest. But in order of things that we asked people to rank, picnic shelter was number 1, swings was number 2, community garden was number 3, log play, embankment slide, drinking fountain. One challenge that we have is with this park is it's a bit of a game of Tetris, and it's a really hard level. These community gardens are really difficult. People told us protect those trees. Well, that also means that we need to protect their tree roots. That might also be from things that people might not notice, like the water pipe that goes to the spigot for this community garden. One of the things that we don't show in the design is there is no sort of shed for people to include any sort of tools, right? So if we're building this for people, they're gonna have to bring all their own tools with them. They can't leave them there on site. We did move the location of the community garden from the 2015 plan so that we could put in the picnic shelter. Again, we heard community, 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 right along with those trees. Picnic shelter was ranked number 1 in this last survey. So we wanted to give that picnic shelter the number 1 real estate in the park. So we moved the community garden down here into the corner. It's kind of difficult to see on this design, but where you're seeing these white outlines, those are existing tree canopies. The dark outlines, those are new trees that we're planting, but we moved the community garden down here labeled number 8 to underneath this red oak here. We made multiple site visits, took multiple pictures. We feel like it's going to get enough sun from the south and from the east. But our arborist has since told us that's not very good for that oak. Please don't do that. Now, the community had this in their plan. They fought very hard to have it included in NCPRD's plan. From what I've heard, I wasn't around back then, but what I heard was NCPRD wanted to label this community garden in the plan as possible or potential community garden. And our residents said, no, 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 we want a community garden. Please put one in there. So people do really want this, or at least a few people really do want this. It's still number 3 on the ranking. But we are finding it very difficult to fit in here. The way I see it, and we've been working with our design team really hard on this, Peter and I have talked a lot about this. We probably have 3 options. We can try to move the picnic shelter up to where we have the number 2 label up here. That would mean that we would move the swale. I just realized you all can't see my cursor.
No.
Sorry about that. I've been trying to show you what I'm looking at with a cursor.
It's okay. If we're on page 26 of the packet, we can follow along with all the markings. So
I've been trying like hell to find that thing.
I don't have my laser pointer. So up here by number 2, there you go, in the middle of the park there.
Yep.
We could move the picnic shelter up there. Now there's some topography changes. It would be really tight. I don't know if we can still get in the water feature. And then we can move the community garden back to where it was in the 2015 plan at the center of the park there, right in the middle. The other option would be to reconfigure the swale and the walking path. We could have more of an inverted P sort of walking path and try and move the community garden over to where that path and swale come out That means we're gonna have to completely redesign the swale and how we fit to manage stormwater in the park.
You mean, you're saying down like by this number 9 bench or whatever it is?
I'm
Oh,
saying,
park entry sign.
see where that number 4 is there, where the bike racks are?
Oh, uh-huh.
The bike racks would need to move, that path next to it would need to move,
Okay.
that swale would need to move,
I see.
and the community garden might go in there in more of a vertical line.
So the path would move more under the oak tree.
Or the path might not even come back down to the sidewalk. It might loop back around there to number 7.
Oh, I see.
That's option maybe number 2. Again, we haven't really worked with this with our engineers yet. Option number 3, and this would be unpopular with some people, but option number 3 would be to look at a location outside of the park to expand the community garden. People told us that they want those trees to stay there. If you look at NCPRD's plan, they were cutting down trees to make this park happen. The neighborhood community, when they had the community garden in their plan, it was up by the number 1 there, and they had to cut down trees to put them up there. The community does not want us to cut down trees. I think we as a city don't want to cut down trees. We saw how important at the Bowman Bray Open House that we want to do that. So my question to you, council, I could really use some of your wisdom here is, what should we do with this community garden? Because it is obviously popular. It is not as popular as some of the other features in the park. And due to the tree roots, due to the tree canopy, we don't have a whole lot of room in this park. And we have to come up with a final plan December 6th.
So there are obviously the apartments just to the south of this that those folks don't have access to gardens.
The Hillside Manor
Is putting in community garden.
has a community garden. They have expanded. I toured it and met with their staff, met some of their more eager residents who are there. Their residents are now planting outside of the plots that they have recently expanded because it is so popular. They have a wait list. We know that Hillside Park is going from, I believe, if my math is correct, 200 units to 600 units.
Yeah.
And we have a feeling that this is something, and this is why Balfour's budget is different than some of the other ones, is we have that low-income community that is growing there, and we wanted to provide community gardens for them. My understanding is why it was important to people in the early 2000s and in the 2015 plan was for those residents. I feel as though this is something that people want to see, but it's a game of Tetris.
Well, so yeah, that's kind of where I was going. In their new design, and I'm trying to remember it, it's been a while, do they have more community gardens?
I don't know if I know the answer to that right now.
You mean in Hillside Park?
In Hillside itself? Yeah.
I think there were some spaces that were sort of mapped as potential,
So I remember
but pretty small. And if they're already oversubscribed with this many residents, how quickly are they going to oversubscribe that? I mean, I do think was a motivator for some of the neighbors. I don't know if that was the only motivator. I don't know if there are other people in the neighborhood as well who wanted community gardens.
Was that the main impetus? Because I do remember back then, people were adamant about it. But that was the driving force. And if we can take care of that actually on.
So just before you move on, I do, or will we continue, if I can just interject, we have been building a relationship with the Hillside Manor staff, so we can follow up very quickly with them to see if they are planning on more. I also just wanted to point out, neither NCPRD nor the city of Milwaukie knows how that we are going to manage this community garden yet. We have some very good ideas. We are starting to make some phone calls. I know that we have some organizations in town who would jump at the opportunity to work with us on this community garden. So I don't want to make it sound like, hey, we can't do it, but we haven't figured that out yet either.
Yeah, there's this whole puzzle in that general neighborhood because Providence has a community garden. I mean, somebody just won an award for their work in managing that not too long ago, you'll remember. So it feels like there's a lot of foment around gardening, which I love as a gardener, and a lot of moving pieces that, I kind of echo the mayor's question of, so where is the interest coming from? Is it perhaps being met in part elsewhere? I understand the need for gardens throughout the community, so this is not an anti-community gardens statement, but I'm hearing you say this site is really, it's not very compatible at all. So if this is something that we need to move elsewhere, and we can do that knowing that we do have community gardens coming in other nearby areas, then maybe that's the thing we do, you know? I mean, in Hillside Park, I don't remember specifics around community gardens per se, but I do remember that a number of the walk-in units will have small yards in the front. Those were intended to be available for gardening. Yeah, I'll have to look at the plans, but anyway.
Yeah, we
It
can,
may have changed, right?
Right,
That
and who
facade, it was
knows?
very
right,
preliminary.
and
Yeah.
it could be that they were in the design and maybe now that they're getting closer to construction because of inflation or some other things they might have, but
Right.
we know the project managers. I just don't know off the top of my head. I didn't look
Yeah.
into it. I should have, but we can follow up with them really quickly and find an answer to that question.
So here, go ahead. You were.
If we weren't able to do the community gardens, would there be any interest in possibly doing fruit trees?
We heard a lot about fruit trees. We do call this the open lawn here. That might be a little bit of a misnomer now because when NCPRD had it in their 2015 plan, it was an open lawn because they were cutting down the apple tree. We are not cutting down the apple tree. We just got a good arborist report on Monday saying that with some very careful tree trimming, we can keep this tree in the park. We can make it appropriate, and we're looking into making sure that we work with somebody who knows what they're doing when it comes to fruit trees. We know that that is very important to the community. We heard a lot about it at the public meeting. We heard a lot about it at the open house that we did. And people want to see, so some of these dark circles here where we're adding more trees, people want those to be fruit trees too. So we will work with the community and we will talk with the tree board and others about what sort of trees we do. I think your question is maybe in addition to that, or?
I was just thinking of, depending on how big that space is, like a mini orchard in lieu of a community garden, if that would be any better. Because I know they have those some like fruit trees that are like semi-dwarf, smaller fruit trees that don't grow too large, but still provide an abundance of fruits. And if there's enough space there, if that would be in lieu of, if we weren't able to do it with the garden.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about a couple of meetings ago was fruit trees.
Right.
Perhaps this is a space where we could do some sort of pilot project to see, working with an outside organization to help us manage those fruit trees. That is a pretty good idea of what we could do.
Sorry, we were having a side conversation up here because I'd found the Hillside Master Plan, the current one, on the county's website, and it does look like there's space for 18 plots, and more than I remembered of sort of those small garden entry green spaces. So I actually feel like there may be more gardening capacity than we necessarily thought there was at this site, in addition to the ever-expanding manor gardens. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think some people in the neighborhood would be helpful to hear that, because I do remember having conversations with people. Some people said, "Oh, community garden, why do you have that?" And we said, "Well, people really wanted it. This is what we've heard, and we have affordable housing and it's growing." And they said, "Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, we definitely want to do that." But knowing that that's expanding, I think might be helpful information for them. I will say if people are watching this video or people are watching from home and they have some strong feelings on this either way, right? Shoot me an email, give me a call. We know that there is demand for community gardens. We are not saying that there doesn't need to be community gardens, but saving the trees, saving the tree roots, and adding in the most popular feature, which is that community space with the shelter, is very important.
So I would also suggest pinning down with Providence whether they're opening. It's been my impression that is not open to the community to garden there, that they have their employees or people that they're working with through their kitchen who do the gardening there. But it would be good to pin down with them if they foresee any opening for more community garden space. Lisa Lashbrook is the community gardens, and Sarah Smith as well, kind of gurus around here.
Yeah, Lisa and I have talked about this community garden in particular. That was before the arborist told us not a really good place to
Not
put
good
it.
for the tree.
Not good for that red oak there. Yeah.
And I guess this is kind of a far-fetched idea, but I know we are building at the end of Balfour Street, we are building a water quality, we are putting in some new stormwater control, and we have some kind of an agreement with the railroad. I don't know if there's some potential there for just a standalone community garden. It may not be a great location to put it next to a railroad with the emissions from trains and stuff.
I would not want to, I have qualms about gardening in my own backyard for food because of my proximity.
To the
Maybe if you did raised beds, it would be better, but historically, railroads burned terrible fuel. It was diesel. It wasn't even diesel, it was number 6. So the soil around railroads is really
Bad.
really pretty bad. So you'd want to do something to make sure that you weren't planting into that existing soil.
So yeah, I've done some rails to trails projects before, and railroads are usually been railroads for a very, very long period of time. They drop and they drip things. It's not always well calculated. It builds up over time. We've talked a lot about Balfour Park. I do want to try and stay on schedule. When Scott told me I had the whole calendar here, I told him I can talk as much as you want me to, but I do want to get through the whole presentation. So
Before we keep going, just Adam, to make sure that we're all comfortable, we're going to proceed. We've heard you that if community gardens are being met elsewhere, you're generally comfortable and would prefer us to try and keep the tree and meet the other demands of the community, correct? I just want to make sure so that you don't come back in a couple weeks and go, what do you mean? I thought we had agreement.
Well, yeah, but that's a big if.
It is a big if. So that's why I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
What is that threshold for you all?
I think it's an important need that needs to be met. And if we can find that it is being met or it can be met elsewhere, and my caveat to that is not yes, someday we'll do community gardens in this other place so that we don't have to do them here and someday becomes never. It would literally have to be part of but if we're finding that Hillside was the main driving force for those and that they're getting a lot of community gardens sufficient to people's needs, then yes.
I don't know if we're ever going to be able to tell you it's sufficient. So it's a new population moving in. It's a large population moving in.
Sure.
And so that's part of my caution here is, do I think 8 additional beds could be used? Probably. Do I think that 8 additional beds are going to be a game changer in the totality of the demand? Probably not. I think that I'll be really blunt. The commitment I made to the representative when we received this funding was that COVID was the driving force of these dollars. So covered meeting spaces were actually a part of the request that they made of us when we took the funds. If the community asked for them, the community's now asked for them, I would be reticent not to then provide, because that was the whole point, right? People couldn't meet indoors. We needed to give them a safe place to meet. So that can't be removed when it's come in first. So that means we would be removing a tree. And that is something we worked really hard as a community not to do. So I just don't want Adam to be in the seat of having to make that call and having him come back and have everyone frustrated that we made that call, if that's really untenable to you. And I'm sorry to put you all in a horrible position. You don't have to make the decision tonight, but I want to be really transparent that I don't think the option is to get rid of the cover.
No.
So then it is a garden versus a tree. And we can have that discussion with some of the community members who've also pushed really hard for this, because I don't think there's a great solution otherwise.
Yeah, I would suggest going to the Ardenwald meeting, frankly, and having this same discussion there.
But maybe meet with Hillside first.
Yeah,
So,
well, yeah.
We'll get some more information and we'll make some phone calls and we'll try and get it.
Thanks, Adam.
I will say, just before I do move on, there were some questions about this water feature. So this was in the neighborhood's plan. This is a water table. It is got a hand pump on one side. It is a trough, a raised trough. It reminds me of the sort of thing when my parents were washing the car in the driveway and the water would run down and my friends would go get our little boats or leaves and pretend they were boats and go down there. It has a trap door, for lack of a better term, or a stopper at one end of the trough that kids can, or anyone can lift up. The water splashes down. It would then drain away. There were some comments that we saw on there about people bathing in it or whatnot. This is a very narrow trough. It is not something that people can run through. We know that some of the comments out there were, hey, you said you didn't want a splash pad because you didn't want to be a destination park. We don't feel like this is a destination amenity. We feel like this is a really cool amenity that we can afford in this park, in part because, and I do want to make sure I mention this, the half-street improvements, the sidewalk and the drop-off area that we're looking at, those are going to come later with the Safe Street project on Belfour that will include safe crossing across 32nd Street. But because those right-of-way improvements are going to be done later on in that project, means that we can afford things. To your point about COVID, I do want to mention probably in the top 3 most favorite comments I've ever received on a park project came out of this survey. And that was that someone wanted to mention that they knew that there were some teenagers who played Dungeons and Dragons in Belfour Park and that building them a safe place to play their game in the park was important. And I think that we owe it to them to have that shelter for them to play in. Moving on to Scott Park. So 20 people attended, 85 surveys in person. We did feel like that number was pretty low for Scott Park. And I did take a quick peek at some of the surveys that we were getting. It was about 50-50 from the concepts. So I did go out to the library book sale on Sunday and the Sunday after the public meeting and do some additional outreach, talk to another 15 people, got another 6 surveys from folks. 21 people were new to Milwaukie planning, 82 identify as white. So if you look at the percentages, it might seem like the percentages between concept 1 and concept 2, and I will show these in a second here. If you look at the percentages, it seems like there's a larger divide between the two. But if you remember back in August, the preference between concept 1 and concept 2 was 49.5% versus 51% or something like that. Here it's only six votes. More importantly, when we look at how people ranked the amenities, the main feature of concept 1 was that pergola, and that's number 3 out of 10. Whereas the main feature of concept number 2, the playground, is number 3 out of 10. And there is a lot of rankings between those two. I don't feel as though we have a definitive idea of which concept 1 or 2 people prefer. I think we know that people don't necessarily prefer that pergola. I think that people say that they want a playground. And the good news is that what we've been trying to do since May is work with 2 concepts and blend them together. And I think that we're getting a good idea of that. But just like with Belfour Park, I would really love some council to hear some of your guidance on this matter. One of the things that I want to mention is that we worked with the Veterans Memorial Group, the partnership that put in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial there in the park. Scott and I have been meeting with them a couple times, and we told them that we would work around the memorial. We have found a way to do that. Those veterans would like to see this memorial expanded. They would like to see it maybe include names of people who served in other conflicts. Maybe it's just people who served in general, maybe that didn't lose their lives. They mentioned perhaps there could be a hometown hero sort of program that they could do. I told them that we would keep this on the survey to see if people wanted us to spend this park money on this feature in the park. Just like when we were talking about drop-off areas and drinking fountains, just because something doesn't rank high doesn't mean it's not important, doesn't mean it's not something we shouldn't do. However, this is pretty low on the ranking. But I think that we should take a very close look at that memorial. We need to have some conversations about how we name things in parks. That's a conversation that's coming in February. But just like when the library started to encroach on the park and people said, hey, wait a second, let's do the park on its own. The park needs an intentional, deliberate planning process. Even if this memorial was high up on the ranking here, I would have told those same veterans groups and all of you, hey, people want to see us do this. We need to find a way to do this. I don't know that I can do it between now and December. I don't even know that I can do it in the design process, which is probably going to last another year. There are park grants specifically for memorials that are out there. I think that it would be a good idea for us, the city, to look into that, to make some adjustments. We do have a dedicated group of veterans. In fact, when we were at the Scott Park meeting and we were talking about our work with veterans, someone said, hey, my son is involved in the Elks group. Give me your card. They've reached out. They want to get involved. I think that this is an important project for the city to do. I think it's pretty clear, though, that folks would like us to see us focus on, a viewing platform, improving the amphitheater, the playground, and some of these other nature-based play items.
I guess,
Just go ahead.
can you elaborate on what they even mean by renovation? Because that memorial isn't very old. That whole thing is only like 7 or 8 years old.
So yes, I can elaborate. So the obelisk in the center and the reflective toppers on the benches, and Scott, jump in here wherever you like. Those are rather new, but the planter boxes, the field-stowed planters, those date back to some of the original park designs from the 1960s, 1965, I believe it was. The veterans were interested in a brick program. Now, they were very clear that they really like the planters and they would like some form of those planters to stay, but wanted to see a sort of situation where people could purchase bricks and install bricks, perhaps maybe in some sort of planter design that could have additional names on it. But the obelisk, I don't think that that was what they meant when they meant changes, because in our discussions with them, they did like those benches there. They specifically mentioned to us, they want people to be able to literally reflect on that obelisk. So I don't know that would change, but I think the area around it could change and get updated.
Yeah, they have a general concept about bricks and a campaign you can build around that, and expanding to include other conflicts and wars and things like that. But I think I totally agree with what Adam was saying about the park project we're focusing on now, and we've conveyed that to the veterans group, and we've had a really good partnership with the American Legion and the Daughters of the American Revolution on that Vietnam piece of it. And I think a lot of that's just really good community energy we want to harness and have that conversation, like Adam said, in the future. And we were as clear as we could with the veterans group, the Legion and the DAR. We're not saying no, we just want to keep the conversation going. And at the moment, for what we're looking at for Scott Park, the monument's not leaving, and we can't say that we're going to grow the footprint of it right now. But there's good energy, and they want to keep the conversation going with us, and that's where we're taking it.
Well, and I don't know what they're thinking about in terms of long-term plan or renovation, but when I think about that space, it feels like so long as that footprint is preserved, there's room to grow in there a little bit. And I think about, when I was in DC in June, I went past it was a memorial, I think, for police officers who had been killed in the line of duty. And it was just a undulating wall that names were inscribed on as it transpired. So there's a lot of different designs that are out there for memorials that are, I think if you had the community support, if you got the grant, you could implement after the fact with this, given the footprint that's already there. So
Yeah, and, the first conversation that we had with this group was, hey, we've heard a lot about making this amphitheater and the stage area accessible. We're going to try and find a way to do it without moving the memorial and keeping the footprint where it is. And that was very important to them. Kudos to that group. They did understand the importance of making that stage accessible and sharing the space, but they did feel very strongly that they need to be included and involved, that we need to handle this with a lot of care, that they do consider this to be hallowed ground, and that they would prefer it not change from its location if it could. And so we worked very hard, and you'll see in both concepts that we found ways to not only go behind the memorial and make the stage accessible, but we're also going to be able to keep those two magnolia trees. One last thing I want to mention before I move to the next slide is we do see Scott Park as being a good place for some more accessible type playground, and particularly safety surfacing. That safety surfacing is very expensive. We're looking at a cost difference between like $3 a square foot to maybe $20 or $25 a square foot. But because we have the supportive amenities there, a parking lot, because Scott Park is going to be a destination park, regardless of what we do there, because the library is a destination library. We see this as being a good place to do that. Looking at the two concepts quickly, and I know I'm getting kind of short on time here. So as I mentioned, the major differences between these two concepts are that in one, you see a pergola, and then in the corner there near the old Nautilus property, you see a soft surface trail and some logs. Those are number 6 on the left there. And then the other one, number 1, is a playground, a more formal playground, and a pergola. Both have some form of pond viewing platform. That pond area is very important to the community. We, unfortunately can't do much with the space that the community is using now. Making that safe and doing it the right way is just too long of a process and too difficult and costly of a process. But this is what we are going to do. Cost is a challenge here with Scott Park as well. But what we've heard for all 3 parks, what we've heard in our focus groups, is accessibility is very important. There are other parks in the area that are getting redeveloped and getting changes to their playgrounds. And in those planning processes, people are also talking about accessibility. This is not something that we can ignore. And I think that it's very important that we look at, because it's so important to the community to have some play features here in Scott Park. I think that having an accessible playground in Scott Park is important, and then blending in some of those other options from the other concept is important. Even though concept number 1 did have more votes, that pergola was not very popular. I will say that the cost of a pergola versus the cost of those tiles is about the same. So there's not, things are going to be pretty tight here. Again, we've got about 30% contingency, and then we've got a 9% inflation buffer in there. And we are trying to save every dollar that we can. But things are pretty tight here at Scott Park as well. We don't show this on here, but we do need to also find a way to, in that library parking space that we share with the park, put in an accessible parking space closer to the park. There is accessible parking at the front door of the library, but not at the front of the park. We need to do that. There are also a couple of trees. In fact, if you go to Scott Park today, you will see that there's a tree there that has a sign on it that says, hey, this tree is dead. We need to remove it. That is near that number 8 there on the concept on the left. That tree is dead. It will need to be removed. It is a hazard. If this were a tree in a more natural area, where we weren't worried about a limb or the tree falling on someone doing yoga or participating in a park program, I don't think I would worry about it so much. Also, the tree next door, our arborist did just come back with a report. The news is worse than it was in the spring. That tree is dying. It only had leaf canopy on about 30% of it. As someone who looks for hazards in parks, because this is a manicured lawn underneath it where we're inviting people to play and picnic and whatever, I think that we are going to have to look at perhaps removing that tree or some very serious trimming there. Those two trees are within the 50 feet of the water resource, and they are in the habitat conservation area, so that we will need to do some mitigation. We are going to save the mitigation on the tree that's being removed for this project, because it doesn't make sense for us to plant a tree right in the middle here while we're working out the design. But in the design, we will obviously follow the tree code, follow the code for habitat conservation area mitigation and the water resource mitigation there. Those things are very important to our community. It's very important to us as a project team. We were very specific when we went out and hired Greenworks, making sure that they put together a team that can help us with those items. And so that's what we're going to do. Real quickly, are there any thoughts on Scott Park or how we might blend those two parks together?
I hate this. I hate to lose. I mean, if what you're talking about is trading off the nature play area for the traditional or the more accessible play area, I would rather see both of the play areas and no pergola. I don't see the point of the pergola.
So what we think we might be able to do here, and I want to be very careful that the money is really tight and the details are still being worked out. But what we think we can do here is, because we have a public building right next door with a bathroom and a drinking fountain that is open most of the time the park is, we think we can sacrifice the drinking fountain here. We know that the library really wanted, and we had in both concepts, story kiosks for a story walk program, but the library is already using temporary signage. They would need a lot of signage for those kiosks, and those kiosks are about $6,000. So we think that by removing the pergola, by sharpening our pencils a little bit here, by removing the drinking fountain, story kiosks, we can find a way to try and do a hybrid kind of wooden design in the formal play area, and then also do in that corner some nature-based play. That would include the rock hoppers that are in both designs there, number 8. That would include probably the number 6s there in the corner there where we have some logs, but the money is really, really tight here. So we are trying to blend both of them, and that is the direction that we are moving is can we work in both different types of play. I will also mention, I didn't talk about this a whole lot, but we are looking at hybrid nature-based play structures in all three parks, because we've heard a lot about that. We do want to move away from plastic and steel.
And is your pencil sharpened hybrid version, does that include a surfacing under the playground area that is the more accessible option, or is it the wood chip option?
That is with a rubberized tile option.
Great.
So, I guess one question would be, if it comes down to rubberized tile and both types of play, or one type of play with rubberized tile, which direction should we move in?
I feel pretty strongly about having that be an accessible area. We don't have any play areas anywhere in the city that are fully accessible. It is a thing that we have community members who really do need that and would benefit from that. It's the perfect place for it. And I feel like we have an opportunity here that we just can't miss. I think, Happy Valley did their own fully accessible playground. That place is used constantly.
Yep.
Constantly underused. They're already adding new equipment to it because it's been so popular. So I think we have an opportunity to do something that's really valuable and important. And I'll also add that having that play area be fully accessible for the kids, I think is great for fostering intergenerational engagement in that site. I know a lot of grandparents take their grandkids to the library. I would love to be able to just continue to encourage that into the outdoors and to make that a place where you really have people who may have some mobility issues feel like it's safe for them to get to the bench to sit there and watch the kids play, regardless of the ability of the kids themselves.
I think that's a really important point that you just made there, is the playing together aspect of things, is playing with family members, playing with friends who may have their own challenges. And I think that we have heard a great deal about accessibility. I don't think a playground like this makes sense at Bowman Bray Park or Belfour Park. You know, a lot of the things that we've been hearing, you know, that were challenging with cost, I felt comfortable saying, well, you know, in those construction documents that we're putting together for Milwaukie Bay Park, you know, we've got a really good playground going in there. We've got a splash pad going in there. So maybe don't worry about that so much at Belfour Park or Scott Park. But with the uncertainty of that project right now, with that being on hold and some things to work out there, you know, I think that going with a rubberized tile is something that we're going to have to try and find a way to do. That doesn't mean that just because it doesn't work out in this budget or this project that, you know, parks are not static. You know, we do not only have to develop parks every 10 years or 20 years. You know, we, just like with the memorial, we can go out after different funding if we need it and add into this. We could phase in that nature-based play, but I think your comments fit in with the project as a whole. And given that we have a building right next door and a parking lot right next door, and I hear people, that parking lot is a challenge. It really is. But I think that with the parks that we have control over and the projects that we have control over, this is the one that we need to kind of do that in. So we're nearing the season finale. We have a special Parks and Rec board meeting on November 16th from 5:30 to 7:30, where we will show people the final plans. There are postcards going out for that. We are going to give preference to comments to PARB members, but keep those open to the public. It will be a very similar presentation to what I gave now without all of the feedback. And then I will bring the plans to you, City Council, on December 6th, around 7 o'clock, I believe that is. We'll be here in City Hall and on Zoom looking at those final plans. Scott, did I take up enough time? Too much time? All right. And that's all I have for you.
That's all?
Great work.
No, it's not. It's all I have in the presentation. I mean, I got a whole other laptop right here. We can go.
Thanks, Adam.
But if there are other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I just wanted to call out that I think Adam has done an incredible job of engaging with our community in a very respectful and kind way. And I think these designs are a great incorporation of what he's heard and also his own leadership. So I really value what he's brought to the table and how he's heard people. And thank you. Congratulations. Well done.
Well, thank you. We have a really good team. There's a lot of support. It is not just me working on this. And, you know, as I've told PARB a few times now, and I think a few people at a few of these events, these parks and these plans can only be as good as the people who participate. So I know we've done a lot. We have done a lot of engagement in a very short period of time. We are getting really close to the summit here. We've got one more meeting to go before we finalize these plans and bring them to all of you on November 16th. So if there are people who are watching this or people who are seeing these plans and they have some comments to give us, please reach out to us, because this work would not look like this if people weren't showing up, and people have been showing up. And that's really encouraging to me. And that does keep us as a project team going. I think that people really want to see these parks happen. And so we are working really hard as a team to make them happen on time and on budget. It's tough out there right now with park projects. I will be very, very honest with that. We are hearing stories about equipment stuck on ships outside of the docks. We are hearing stories of subcontractors not getting enough people, subcontractors not showing up. We're hearing a lot of stories about design during construction. We've experienced some of that on other projects here as a city. So it's tough, but I think that we are trying to front load, and our consultants are maybe a little bit concerned about what we're asking them to do early on, but we're trying really, really hard to be transparent with folks and show them what we can afford and being really trying to be really, really thoughtful of what we do. So, and I think that, so thank you, Ann, for saying that, but you all deserve that thanks too, and all the people watching this deserve a lot of thanks because people are really coming out for this project.
I assume you know that the Ardenwald neighborhood's been raising money for Balfour and has a small pool of money that can supplement or do something at Balfour.
I've heard about the plant sales. You know, Balfour Park is the one where we're not really concerned about the budget as much, and that's because we have that Safe Road project. And you know, I think that if they do have some funds for some things that they'd like to see in the park or in the neighborhood, we would be really grateful to work with them. And I think that, you know, some of the challenges that we talked about, maybe we can start to work with them to address them through that. Even though Balfour Park isn't a challenge on this project, right? That always means that there can be a little bit something more. And like I said, you know, sometimes when you're working on projects, you find some interesting things. I was redoing a street once at one of the cities I worked in next to a park, and we found a utility tunnel. There was an automotive factory on one side. There was a sub station on the other side, and both entities were pointing at each other saying, no, we don't know why there's a tunnel across the street connecting both buildings 4 feet underneath the street. You know, so you find all sorts of weird things. So if the neighborhood association has some funds that they would like to contribute, we would love to continue to work with them on that.
Well, they've definitely been raising money for many years for Balfour Park, so.
They have been
think
working
they
on
have
this park
something
project
on
for a very long time.
Something on the
and
order of 15,000, something in that kind of ballpark, I think.
Okay, well, that might be a community garden. We'll see what we can do there. Again, the Tetris is really hard. The making everything fit is really hard, but yeah, we'll work with whoever we can to make these things happen. Great. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. The executive sessions, I should know
We do
about.
not.
Okay, excellent. Then we will see you all back here at 6 o'clock.
We actually have time to eat.